use the Q&A function, or by all means raise your hand. Teresa, I cannot remember. It reminded me of just how windy it was that day at the Showman's Show, wasn't it? My gosh.
It was quite a breezy day, and I have to acknowledge that I wasn't hugely well equipped for the wind and the rain, but I'll know better next time. If I get to visit the Showman's Show again, which I very much hope I will come appropriately equipped with umbrellas, waterproofs, Wellington boots, etc.
Fantastic. Welcome to Outdoor Events. We have our first question from Chris Ciccarello here. Chris, I'm going to promote you to a panelist, you lucky thing, and you will shortly be allowed onto the screen, if I've done that properly. Chris, there you go. You're coming through loud and clear. Chris, by all means, ask your question, Teresa.
Hello, Al. Hi, Teresa. Thanks so much for being with us today. Great interview there. I've got a slight extension question on that. So earlier in the summer, quite a few of us were on various industry calls, some with Ben Everett, who I'm sure you know, MP for South Milton Keynes, who was trying to guide us through some of the choppy waters. At the time, even though the insurance piece is now thankfully across the line, thanks for that, there was a bit of a sense of helplessness, I think, from some of us that had spent about a year on these calls trying to convey what we felt was our financial importance and our woes. You mentioned jobs and the economy on the interview there with Al. Do you think there are any other things we could do better in terms of communicating with government values, worth, and ideals, or do you think that now you're steering the APPG that's much better and more in hand, if you like?
Thank you for the question. Relationships with Parliament and government the reality is it's a task that's never finished. You can never say, right, I've done that. That's all I need to do. Not least because issues changed, and you might have managed to brief up the most powerful figures in government about what you want as a sector, and then the following week some great new crisis arises that you need their help on. So I think the best advice I can give is, as I said in the interview, to devote the time and the resources to your relationships with government. And a good way to do that is to engage with local backbench MPs, and with the trade bodies getting their member companies who may have offices or venues in particular places to engage with those local MPs, because a backbench MP is a very good route into talking to ministers and making sure they understand the concerns of the constituency that the MP represents. So I wish I could give you a magic solution, but unfortunately it's just a question of working together with your colleagues in the industry, with the various trade associations, and trying to talk directly to local MPs to make the case for not just about a particular issue you may be worried about, whether it's skills or financial support or insurance, but also, as you say, making sure that they understand that there are hundreds of thousands of jobs that depend directly on successful events and festivals, and probably considerably more jobs which are supported indirectly by the sector.
Thank you. Good stuff.
Thanks so much, Teresa. Actually, while I demote Chris, sorry, Chris, it's cutthroat, this Zoom management. We've got a question in it actually that follows on from that, actually, which is from Caroline Jackson, who I think you know, Teresa, from BVEP and many university fame, quite frankly. I'll read it verbatim. Thank you, Teresa. What can we do as an industry to assist the APPG with a coherent message to Parliament? It's probably an extension of the last question, but worth addressing.
Well, I think we should probably get some APPG meetings going again soon to hear from the industry. But certainly when Parliament finally returns to some kind of normality in relation to visitor groups. At the moment, we seem to be partially locked down despite the rest of the country having opened up. But I think getting representatives in from the event sector to meet MPs on a relatively regular basis is important. It's always actually quite difficult to grab the attention of MPs and pull them along to these events, but I think that's the sort of meat and drink of APPGs, and I'm very keen that we go back to some kind of normality. Zoom calls are great, and no doubt we'll be doing a few of those over the coming months, but getting I think some of your key industry figures together with parliamentarians over the next few months will be very helpful.
Fantastic. Thanks, Teresa. I'm now going to Tom Clements, who we know as our president, has a question. So again, I'm going to quickly promote Tom into the room, who has a couple of questions actually, if that's okay. Hi, Tom. You might just need to take yourself off mute, if that's okay. There we go. Tom, you're in the room.
Yes, that was certainly an experience trying to get back into this. Teresa, hello there and welcome. I would have met you down at the Showman Show, but unfortunately I tested positive for COVID, so I had to do my 10 days, as they say. Watching your video there, absolutely brilliant. I'm so delighted you're so enthusiastic for our industry, and please do not, no matter what happens, lose that enthusiasm, because it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I'm just delighted. But anyway, one question. In my daytime life, we provide crowd management to events, and whilst some events may employ up to 1,000 people, the Security Industry Authority, which is the ones that licenses all, during the lockdown, a number of all our staff throughout the country, SIA license came up for renewal. Because they weren't working, they didn't renew it. And now we have a situation whereby for them to get back to having the license, they have to go and take all the training courses again, which is about 45, 50 hours, and will cost about £300 each, and then pay for their license on the assumption that they pass it, which is another 220. So that's 500 quid for staff that, at this moment in time in life are maybe working every second week at a football match or something like that. Is there a way that the APPG can talk the SIA and just to reissue these licenses to people? Because, to make them go through the whole training again because of a lapse, because the country's in lockdown, I think is very unfair, and it's definitely hurting our industry.
Can I just come back to you on something? Unfortunately, the Wi-Fi connections in Parliament are not great, so you were slightly muffled then. Can you just explain to me what sort of licenses you're talking about? Is this licenses to serve alcohol? No. In order to work as a security crowd management person within our industry, they need to be licensed by the Security Industry Authority, which is a government quango, I guess, but it was brought together so that criminals couldn't run about masquerading as that's. Now it's obviously very important for pub doors and nightclubs and what have you, but when you come to the events, we need to have licenses as well. The problem being is that during the 1.5 years of lockdown, a number of event crowd management persons who had the license, it lapsed because they had no money to pay for it. And now the SIA are making them go back and do through all the training again, etc., and it's going to cost about £500 all in, give or take. These people can't afford that. We're dealing with staff that, they're on 0-hour contracts, and yes, I know that's probably not right. And as an employer, we certainly don't want people on 0-hour contracts. We'd rather give them proper contracts, but unfortunately, the work of industries like that, you're working one weekend at Glastonbury, you're not working again for another 2 or 3 weekends, so forth and so on. But the SIA are being very, very unpractical, and they don't want to talk to people like us. So I was hoping you, with your APPG hat on and being a former minister, might have a bit more power to get into them, so that we can then help
the industry along?
I see. Yes. Well, I'd be more than happy to get in contact with the SIA to ask if there can be any flexibility. I appreciate that with people's licenses lapsing after a period, it can be tough in the current circumstances to ask them to go through the entire process of being relicensed along with paying fees. So I think some flexibility from the SIA could be a good idea. Obviously, they are performing an important function, and as you say, well, they were set up because of anxieties about sort of irresponsible or criminal elements who might be involved in the security business. But clearly, sort of during the COVID pandemic, there are all sorts of ways in which flexibilities were introduced to try and get us through. And I would certainly be very happy to ask the SIA to look at whether they could do more to be understanding about the problems faced by people maybe earning not a huge amount of money who are going to find it difficult to re-qualify and jump through the hoops, which they've already done so in the past. So I shall certainly take that away as some homework to do as chair of the APPG.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Actually, I hope our guest won't mind if I have another one, which is about sort of skills and training in general. I mean, I'm sure we're not the only industry, but we'll probably claim to be one of the hardest hit industry of lost skills and lost people. And getting either those people back or new bright young things into our industry is going to be a massive thing for 2022, just given the amount of events that we're looking at. High profile things, not these things like Queen's Jubilees and things like that. We really do need talent back in. I was just wondering what conversations are happening probably more broadly across government about trying to get good people back into work and into the right industries that need them.
We've had, obviously, sort of across the economy, some tremendous success in terms of getting people into work and avoiding the kind of crippling rates of unemployment that were initially predicted to kick in because of the pandemic. There was talk of 3-4 million, 12%, and none of that has happened. And we now have, I think we're back up to record numbers in work. So there is some success, but clearly as a nation, we need, our key economic problem is productivity. We need, and part of fixing that is giving people the skills they need to be more productive. So I think with the events sector, the challenge is obviously very similar to that faced across the economy. That is getting people with the right skills and experience to fill the vacancies. And I'd certainly encourage the event sector to be involved in the debate on the new approach to vocational qualifications, things like T-levels, and to be strongly focused on apprenticeships as well as a means to increase the sort of talent pipeline. And also alongside that, to be out there making the case for events as a great career to enter. And I think looking to see what more can be done to tell people that there is a sort of career progression, that if they go in at some of the junior levels, that there's a path that they can follow to the more responsible, higher paid jobs as well. I think those are very important ways for the sector to attract the right people to do the jobs to make events and conferences a big success.
That's great, thank you, Teresa. I would keep on encouraging people, if you have a question, by all means do raise your hand or put it in the Q&A function. There's one in the Q&A function which I'll read to you, Teresa, and hopefully this makes more sense. It's something that I'm not completely au fait with myself, so hopefully this will help you. I'd also love to hear Teresa's thoughts on when we might expect some solid guidance on the new HFSS regulations. Some of my colleagues in the in the fast-moving consumer goods and alcohol accounts would be most grateful as they plan 22 campaigns. I was wondering whether you could answer that one.
I'm afraid I can't, because I'm struggling to know what HFSS stands for in this context. Are these the new product standards?
It would be good, I think, if the person that asked the question could just clarify, that would be really helpful. Again, in the chat function, that'd be great, and I can read the question.
Although I'm afraid the short answer is, as I'm not clear on what they are, I'm afraid I
Yeah, that's
don't
right.
know when we can expect them. So that might shortcut the answer.
Yeah, that the answer I bet. No, fair enough. There was another question that that has come up that I thought might be one you could maybe give us some sort of direction on it, albeit I'm not sure anyone really knows. But things like passports, vaccine passports, how that attests to plans under Plan B as well. Is there any guidance you can give us on that? Insight, present thinking, anything you can prod in our direction, Teresa?
Yes, well, this is a big question, isn't it?
Yes, sorry.
The government have, as you know, included a possible revival of the vaccine passport idea as part of Plan B. There is no sort of definite intention to introduce or mandate the use of vaccine passports in the event of the COVID emergency recurring, but it is one of the options that is most definitely on the table. And clearly we've seen in parts of the United Kingdom, for example, in Scotland, and more recently in Northern Ireland, they're being introduced in a number of contexts. I think there's a lot of resistance to them by some quite sort of vocal and influential groups, not least within Parliament. I certainly believe that the government was coming under a lot of pressure during the period where it was sort of looking at the issue and wondering whether to introduce, or considering whether to introduce, these vaccine passports. And I think part of the reason why it did not follow the example set by a number of other European countries was because of some quite vocal public concern. I think in part it'll depend on the research on whether they're working or not. It is striking. I understand in France, for example, they're required routinely in all sorts of contexts. I personally continue to be somewhat skeptical about whether they're the right way forward and whether they're necessarily the best way to keep pressure on reducing COVID cases. But it will be for the government to look very carefully at the research. But overall, I don't think it's very likely that we will get a vaccine passport scheme introduced in England. And I'm not sure how much longer those schemes will necessarily operate in other parts of the United Kingdom, given the controversy that surrounds them. But the point I've always made to government is that if they do start to mandate vaccine passports, then they've got to provide support and help to those businesses and bodies that are going to be required to use them and check them. And they've got to have good systems for ensuring that these passports can be issued, recognised and checked. They can't just leave it entirely to the sectors affected. It needs to be a government project to work. And so I will always argue that if the government wants these passports to be mandatory, it does need to give help to the hospitality and event sector that might be called on to implement them.
Thanks. No, really appreciate that insight. Thank you. I felt that was a slightly cheeky question, which you've actually really helped us with. So thank you on that one. And just as a follow up on things that are bubbling away at the moment as well, someone's asking about the reinsurance scheme, which at the moment is something that I think we're all really, really grateful to have, but it's needs to sort of work a little bit better at the moment. I think we're all sort of aware that it's not perfect just yet. Is there anything we can be doing just to help facilitate that? I personally, we've been engaging with the DCMS a lot to to feedback our members' concerns and problems with it. But is there anything we can be doing to sort of get that working a little bit harder for us?
I think you need to collect information from the members of the various trade associations so that government has an understanding of how it's working. And if it's not working, to explain how it can be fixed. Because certainly, and I would be interested to hear updates from NOEA members or others involved in the event sector about whether they have been using this scheme, and if not, why it wasn't suitable for them. So collecting the data and the information and making sure that it's DCMS are aware of it, I think is the most important way forward at this stage.
No, thanks, Teresa. I'm just conscious that we've got Liz in the room with us. Liz, and I'm trying to work out, Liz, whether it's because you have a question or because Liz is a panelist a little bit later on today. Oh no, there you go. That answers my question. Liz is no longer in the room. Liz would usually have a question. I was trying to work in how that happens, but that's fine. Another wider question that's come in as well is it's one of preparation. There's a big year of events coming in 2022, Commonwealth Games, Jubilees and things like that. Again, a slightly unfair question, but one I'd love your opinion on, which is how more prepared do we feel as a government, as industry, for a second pandemic or future pandemics as we go forward? Is it something that's really scares people in the events industry that we should, heaven forbid, have to go through this again?
Sadly, I think we can't eliminate the risk of going through this again, not least because COVID will be with us permanently, and there could be mutations of the virus that make it more serious and more infectious, but also because new diseases can emerge. My feeling is that we are better equipped now to deal with a pandemic, but I suppose one of the problems we had with the COVID emergency was our pre-pandemic planning had been focused on flu, and therefore I think there wasn't enough of an emphasis when it came to COVID of the degree of asymptomatic transition, which is obviously one of the things that distinguishes COVID from flu, because with many flu viruses, you tend to get ill when you get it, whereas for a very significant number of people with COVID, they have no symptoms. One of the big difficulties at the start of the pandemic was, there was only awareness that the disease had only been sort of identified, a question of what, sort of 6 to 8 weeks before it started to appear in Western Europe. And so we knew very, very little about it. And it will be crucial for the public inquiry that assesses how the pandemic has been handled to make sure it recommends how we can make sure we are better prepared for the next time that this happens. One of the things I think that will come out well from the sort of the review, the look back, the sort of post-mortem, is the role of scientists in immediately researching treatments. So in this country, we were the first to find and approve a treatment for COVID, which is the dexamethasone, a very low-cost steroid, which is, since it was discovered through the recovery trial, which was run in this country, has probably saved millions of lives around the world by alleviating COVID symptoms. And then, of course, the tremendous progress we had in accelerating the development of a vaccine and its assessment and approval by the regulators. So that scientific side is something which was a massive success story for the United Kingdom, culminating in the biggest vaccine program ever. And so I think particularly now we have a blueprint for researching new diseases and developing vaccines, that will help us be more resilient and better prepared for future pandemics.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Teresa. I've got a question from Philip. Philip, you put it in the Q&A, but I was wondering whether I could bring you into the meeting just to ask it, because I think it might require a little bit of explanation for Teresa. Just a second. I'm just promoting you, Philip. Here we go. I hope you don't mind me doing that, Philip, and maybe you can ask the question directly. Nearly there.
Good morning, Teresa.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Philip Day, and I'm a solicitor specialising in events. Back in July of last year, the government made this wonderful regulation called the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England #3 Regulations 2020, which gave local authorities, county councils, very wide sweeping powers to close down events, prevent them from happening, impose restrictions on them if they considered that it was necessary to do that because of the incidence of coronavirus in their local area. Now, those regulations were due to expire originally in July of 2020, but they've been extended and they've been extended. And as things stand currently, they're not due to come to an end until I think it's the 24th of March of next year. Now, these regulations are something of a sword of Damocles hanging over event organisers and indeed others. And I was wondering if the government had any intention of reviewing those, ideally long before they're due to expire. But conversely, whether there is any significant risk that the same thing will happen again, they'll be extended for a further 6 months to effectively cover the entire summer season for events. I don't know if you have any inside info as to thinking on those regulations in particular.
It is, I mean, all of these COVID rules are kept under constant review, and I think there probably is a risk that when it comes to March, the government decides that they can't be confident that the COVID emergency is completely over, and that they may wish to see them extended. But I certainly feel that if we get through this winter without lockdowns and a major recurrence of the COVID emergency and the pressure on the NHS, which is so potentially damaging, then we really do have to start looking at these quite draconian COVID emergency measures. It would not be right to keep them on the statute book indefinitely. And I appreciate that the uncertainty that these cancellation, the uncertainty caused by a law which says that local authorities can arbitrarily just shut down events adds to cost because it adds to risks. So I'm grateful to you for alerting me to that aspect of COVID emergency legislations. Parliament really needs to take seriously the scrutiny process and the renewal process of these regulations. I mean, up to now, there's been some, very apologies for that background noise. That's just a session of Parliament starting in the background. I think that the time is coming when some of these powers and these restrictions which were introduced for an emergency should be lifted.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is that if my understanding is correct, the two occasions upon which they've been extended, there wasn't even a debate in Parliament about it. It was done effectively as an administrative exercise by the Secretary of State.
That has happened on a couple of occasions, but I certainly feel that now we have successfully moved on from so much of the COVID emergency. We've made such progress. We do need a bigger debate, and a proper discussion about the detail of these emergency measures to determine which we need to retain and which should go.
Thank you.
Teresa, thank you. Philip, thanks again for your question. I really appreciate it. We probably have time for maybe one or two more questions, one of which is from Susan Turner, our CEO. I'm going to bring Susan into the room to ask a question. Just a second. Susan, you were going to ask about DCMS, if that's okay.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. Teresa, I know, hello, and thank you very much for coming to Showman's Show on that really windy day. It was a question, I know we sit with DCMS as events, but sometimes we do get sort of overshadowed by tourism. Are we in the best department? Because we do cross over a little bit with, business as well. And would there ever be a possibility of an events minister?
Well, I think in theory, Nigel Huddleston is the events minister. He certainly is the sort of primary point of contact for backbenchers and usually answers the questions in Parliament about events. And I actually am due to see him this afternoon to discuss a number of important events related matters. I think DCMS is quite a good department to be aligned with. It's certainly not the biggest in Westminster, obviously, but it does have significant influence in government. And I think that there would, if the event sector was covered just by bays, I think there would be a danger that it slightly sort of gets lost amongst the wider business sector. So I would certainly say that if one was reshuffling responsibilities within government, that it would make sense for events and conferences to remain within the remit of DCMS. Again, apologies for the bell ringing. It's not a vote, it's just things getting started in the chamber.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Susan, did you have one more question for Teresa?
Well, I had one cheeky one, but I don't suppose I'm allowed to ask that one, which I sent to you.
I think you can.
All right. Okay. I've got two then, Teresa, and this is sort of probably. Are we finishing up on this?
Yeah. I think probably we've probably got enough for your two questions, okay. Susan.
The first one is a bit cheeky, Teresa. We've got another session today, and it's not really outdoor related, of diversity, inclusion, and equality. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on the current debate going on in Parliament about mothers being able to bring their children into the House of Commons.
Well, I think I don't see a problem with women being able to bring their babies into the chamber if they need to. I think there's absolutely a place for that, and it's. I hope that we resolve this current dispute between Stella Creasy and the Speaker in a sensible way. But I mean, actually looking at wider equalities matters, this reminds me of something that I perhaps should have said in response to the earlier question on talent, recruitment, skills. I think as a society, we're probably not good enough at recognizing the talent, experience and value of older people, particularly older women who might be coming back into the labour force, perhaps after a career break for caring responsibilities. And I think that a smart employer might actually want to, or a sector as a whole, could target that demographic. And that would have real benefits in terms of diversity and inclusion, but also you'd end up recruiting some great people. So women in the workforce is crucial, whether it's enabling them to bring their babies to work when they need to, or whether it's slightly more mature ladies of perhaps my age who might be interested in forging a new career in the events business.
Right.
Thank you. I've got one more, Al, but there is one in the chat box as
No,
well.
no, don't worry. It's actually a really lovely comment that's going to allow me to finish the interview.
Okay. And then my second question, Teresa, is, but you have been a great supporter of events, and it's a shame we've had to do Zoom calls. I have sort of said, please, we really need to do in person next year. So that would bring me on to saying, I would be delighted if we could invite you actually to Bath next year to perhaps attend the conference, or actually attend the awards dinner that we hope to have, which takes place in the Roman Baths. And if you've never been, it's the most spectacular evening. So if you were available next November about this sort of time, I think it's the 23rd, it would be lovely to have you as our guest.
Well, I will do my very best on that. I'm a great fan of the Roman Baths. I've visited to see them at times in the past, and it must be spectacular to hold an event there. So I can't make any promises, you know what MP diaries are like, but I will do my best to come along. And I suppose I would just emphasize that, I mean, one of the reasons why I've become involved in the APPG is because, you know, I recognize how important events are to people's daily lives, and they can form such sort of special days for individuals and families. And so, as well as the economic clout of your sector, I think that it's important to recognize that events, conferences and festivals form such a very valued part of life in this country and quality of life in this country. And that was illustrated by the fact that during lockdown, one of the things people missed most of all, I think, was to be able to get together with others at events and conferences and festivals.
Thank you so much. And thanks for your question, Susan. Look, we're going to bring this session to a close, but thanks so much for the questions, everybody, and thanks so much to you, Teresa. I mentioned there was something that came up in the Q&As here, which is a comment from Ella, who can put this no better than I can, which is, she's just said, not a question, but just wanted to say it's great to hear Teresa speak so positively, openly and supportively of the sector. I could not agree with her more. Teresa, thank you so much for your time. It means a huge amount to us. So thanks for coming on and humoring us for this session. It's much appreciated.
Well, no problem. Thank you for the questions, for asking me to take part in your conference. And again, sorry about the division bell causing a few interruptions. That's one of the hazards of being a member of Parliament. And I very much hope that perhaps I might get to meet you all in person at Bath next year. Let's hope so.
Fantastic. Now, everybody, the next session starts at 11:45. So again, as per before, by all means, we will close a session, which will send you all back to the lobby. And if you click on there, just around that 11:45 time, you have been given the gift of time, 5 minutes to do whatever you want. Check one email or two if you're feeling ambitious. But looking forward to seeing you all back at 11:45 for the next session. Thanks again, everyone.